What if deja vu isn't a glitch in your brain, but in the simulation itself? Every time you sense you've been here before, maybe you have. What if time isn't a line but a loop of code, running, crashing, rebooting, and you are the program that refuses to terminate? Quantum physicists say information can never be destroyed. So what happens to consciousness? If consciousness is information, you don't die, you reload, and each morning you wake up remembering something you're not supposed to. Welcome back to the loop. The alarm screams at 6:47 a.m. Not 6:45, not 7 o'clock, always 6:47. You know this because you've been counting. Not days, that would be too simple. You've been counting the spaces between certainty and doubt, the microseconds where your hand hesitates before hitting snooze, the exact timbre of your neighbour's cough filtering through the thin apartment walls. 73 times. But here's what they don't tell you about deja vu in the textbooks. It's not supposed to have a soundtrack. The same song bleeds through your radio every morning. That indie track about entropy and lost loves that you've never heard anywhere else. The DJ's voice carries the same inflection, the same pause before announcing the weather. Partly cloudy with a chance of existential crisis, he never says, but should. Your coffee maker gurgles at precisely 6:50. The sound is wrong, mechanical and wet, like drowning in reverse. You've tried different brands, different machines, even different apartments. The sound follows you. Or maybe you follow it. The bathroom mirror reflects someone who looks like you but isn't quite right. The scar above your left eyebrow, from falling off your bike at 7, shifts positions. Sometimes it's darker, sometimes lighter, sometimes it's not there at all. You've started taking photos, but they delete themselves, not immediately. That would be too obvious. They fade over days, pixels bleeding out like watercolours in rain. You're not losing your mind. This is what you tell yourself as you brush your teeth with the same mechanical precision you've perfected over 73 iterations. Counterclockwise circles, 30 seconds per quadrant. Your reflection doesn't always match the motion. Sometimes it leads, sometimes it lags, like a badly dubbed film where the audio track has given up trying to sync. The shower runs cold for exactly 43 seconds before the hot water kicks in. You've timed it. You've called the landlord. You've had 3 different plumbers examine the pipes. They all say the same thing. Old building, you know how it is. But you don't know how it is. You know how it was yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, in exactly the same sequence. Outside, Mrs. Chen waters her plants at 7:15. She waves, you wave back. Her cat, Schrödinger, because of course it is, sits in the window simultaneously dead and alive until you observe it moving. Quantum mechanics. Jokes aren't funny when they're your life. The coffee shop on 5th Street is exactly 1,247 steps from your front door. You've counted. The barista with the nose ring and the existential philosophy degree makes your latte with the same foam art every time, a leaf that looks suspiciously like a question mark. Wasn't expecting that, she says, as if surprise was still possible in a world of infinite repetition. But here's the thing about loops. They're not perfect circles. They're spirals, slowly degrading, losing information with each iteration, like a photocopy of a photocopy. The details blur. The conversation at table 3 shifts slightly. The businessman in the corner reads a different newspaper headline, but it's the same date. Always the same date. March 15th, 2005. The Ides of March, et tu, reality. You order the same drink, sit at the same table, open the same laptop. The document you were working on yesterday is gone, not deleted, gone, as if it never existed, but you remember writing it. You remember the specific phrase about quantum entanglement feeling like emotional archaeology. You remember because repetition has made your memory hyperacute, a survival mechanism for a world that keeps forgetting itself. The news plays on the mounted TV. Same stories, same footage, same breaking news that broke 73 days ago. A stock market fluctuation that never resolves. A weather system that never moves. A missing person who's been missing for exactly as long as you've been counting. Your phone buzzes. Unknown number. The text reads, "Do you remember me?" You don't reply, you never reply, but sometimes, maybe the 37th loop, maybe the 61st, you do, and the response is always the same silence, as if the universe holds its breath waiting for something to change. The walk to work is 2,893 steps. You know because you've optimized it, testing every possible route like a rat in a maze that's been designed by a sadistic artificial intelligence with a philosophy degree. The same homeless man asks for change at the same intersection. You give him $5, he says, "God bless," but his eyes hold recognition that transcends charity. "Do I know you?" you asked him once. "Maybe Loop 47. "We all know each other," he replied. "We just keep forgetting." Your office building elevator is broken. Not broken, but broken in the same specific way. It skips the 4th floor, the button doesn't light up, and it makes a sound like digital weeping between the 3rd and 5th floors. Maintenance says they'll fix it tomorrow. They've been saying that for 73 tomorrows. Sarah from accounting tells the same joke about quarterly reports being like quantum mechanics. Nobody understands them, but everyone pretends they do. She laughs at the same moment, touches her hair at the same angle, checks her phone at exactly 9:47 a.m. But you notice the small changes. Her coffee cup is slightly different. Yesterday it was blue. Today it's sort of blue with a hairline crack. Tomorrow it might be red, or it might not exist at all. The universe is debugging itself, and you're witnessing the process. Your computer loads the same desktop, the same files, the same unfinished email draft to someone whose name you can't quite remember, but whose importance feels cosmic. You type the same words, delete them, type them again. The cursor blinks like a metronome counting down to something you can't name. This is not déjà vu. Déjà vu is fleeting, a glitch in perception that dissolves under examination. This is something else, a systematic repetition that only you seem to notice, as if you're the only conscious observer in a simulation that's stuck on repeat. The day ends as it began, with precision, with unease, with the growing certainty that reality has a bug and you're the only one experiencing the symptoms. You fall asleep wondering if tomorrow will bring Loop 74, or if you'll finally break through to March 16th. The alarm will scream at 6:47 a.m. You already know this. The first thing you do now, Loop 74, though counting feels increasingly arbitrary, is check the timestamps. Your phone, March 15th, 2025, 6:47:03 a.m. Your laptop, March 15th, 2025, 6:47:03 a.m. The smart TV, March 15th, 2025, 6:47:03 a.m. Perfect synchronization in an imperfect world. This is wrong. Time doesn't work like this. Digital clocks drift, servers desync, even atomic clocks have margins of error measured in nanoseconds. But here, in your increasingly unstable reality, every timepiece agrees with mechanical precision. You've started keeping a physical journal, pen and paper, analog resistance against digital repetition. But the entries change. Not all at once, not obviously. Words shift, your handwriting becomes someone else's, yesterday's insights become tomorrow's questions written in yesterday's ink. If data replays, does life replay? You wrote this, you remember writing this, but the handwriting isn't yours, and the ink hasn't dried properly, smearing under your thumb like the universe is still wet with its own creation. The coffee maker gurgles at 6:52, but today the sound has a digital edge, like an audio file compressed too many times, artifacts bleeding through the mechanical noise. You record it on your phone. Playback reveals something impossible. The sound is too clean, too perfect, as if it's not mechanical at all, but a digital approximation of mechanical noise. Everything sounds like this now. Your neighbor's cough, the traffic outside, even your own voice. When you speak aloud to test the acoustics of reality, you're living in a world of perfectly imperfect sounds, like a video game with an unlimited budget but limited imagination. The bathroom mirror situation has escalated. Your reflection now leads by exactly 0.3 seconds. You've tested this, timing the delay with your phone's stopwatch app. Raise your hand, reflection follows. Smile, reflection anticipates. It's performing your life before you live it, like a badly synced preview of your own existence. You break the mirror. Actually, you try to break the mirror. Your fist stops 3 inches from the surface, not because you change your mind, but because the space between your knuckles and the glass becomes impossibly elastic, stretching like reality has a physics engine with broken collision detection. This is a simulation, you say to your reflection, which mouths the words before you speak them. But that's impossible. Simulations require simulators. Who would build this? Why would they trap you specifically in an endless March 15th, 25? What makes you special enough to warrant this kind of cosmic attention? The shower runs cold for 43 seconds, but today you count actual seconds instead of approximating. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, Your count reaches 43 exactly as the hot water begins. Not around 43, not approximately 43, exactly 43, as if some vast computational system is executing a simple timer function. You laugh because the alternative is screaming. Outside, Mrs. Chen waters her plants at 7:1500. Not 7:15 a.m. approximately. 7:15 exactly down to the second, her movements flowing with the precision of keyframe animation. Schrödinger. The cat sits in quantum superposition until you observe it, then collapses into a specific pose. Left paw raised, head tilted 17 degrees clockwise. The coffee shop is still 10 steps away, but you notice something new. Your phone's step counter resets to 0 each time you leave your apartment building. Not gradually, not with a lag, instantly, as if crossing the threshold triggers a script that reinitializes your location data. Inside, the barista with the philosophy degree is reading Borges. The Library of Babel, she says without looking up. You know that story? You do. A universe containing every possible book, including all the false ones, all the meaningless ones, all the ones that are identical except for a single letter. Infinite information, infinite noise, infinite repetition. What if, she continues, still not looking at you? What if we're living in one of the books? What if this whole reality is just one possible sequence in an infinite library of possibilities? She hands you your latte. The foam art is different. Not a leaf that looks like a question mark, but actual text. Help. You blink. When you look again, it's just foam, random patterns that your pattern-seeking brain interpreted as language. But for a moment, for just one impossible moment, someone was trying to communicate. Wasn't expecting that, she says, right on schedule. The TV news shows the same stories, but the footage is subtly different. The reporter covering the stock market fluctuation stumbles over a word that she delivered perfectly yesterday. The weather system hasn't moved, but the satellite imagery has changed. Same storm, different frame, like someone is manually advancing through a slideshow instead of showing live footage. Your laptop takes exactly 2.7 seconds to boot up. Always 2.7 seconds, regardless of what programs you had open, regardless of updates or file system changes. Operating systems don't work like this. Entropy doesn't work like this. Reality doesn't work like this. But you do, apparently. The email draft on your desktop has changed again. Yesterday it was addressed to someone named MS. Today it's msimul. The subject line reads RE Loopback Protocol Status. You've never worked on anything called Loopback Protocol. You've never heard of anything called Loopback Protocol, but you're living it. You try to send the email. The send button is clickable, responsive, but nothing happens. The email remains in drafts, timestamp unchanged, as if the act of sending exists in a different layer of reality than the act of clicking. Sarah from accounting tells her quantum mechanics joke, but today she adds a postscript. You know what's funny about observation in quantum mechanics? The act of measuring changes the system, makes you wonder what happens when the system tries to measure itself. She looks directly at you when she says this. Direct eye contact for exactly 1.3 seconds before returning to her script, her movements, her predetermined path through this increasingly unstable day. At lunch, you walk to a different restaurant. The universe allows this deviation, but the menu is identical to every other restaurant in a 6-block radius. Same prices, same descriptions, same impossible uniformity. You order something random, Schrödinger's sandwich, because of course that's an option, and the server brings you the exact meal you would have ordered at your usual place. How did you know, you ask. Know what, they reply. But their eyes are the same as the homeless man's, the same as the barista's, the same as your reflections. Recognition wrapped in scripted ignorance. The afternoon passes in familiar patterns with unfamiliar variations, every conversation you've heard before but with words slightly rearranged, every sound you've memorized but with digital artifacts bleeding through, every sight you've catalogued but rendered at a slightly different resolution. By 5:47 p.m., exactly 12 hours after your alarm, you understand something fundamental. You're not experiencing repetition. You're experiencing iteration. Each loop isn't identical, it's a new version of the same program with minor updates, bug fixes, feature modifications. Someone is debugging your life. The question is, are you the user or are you the bug? You fall asleep knowing tomorrow will bring loop 75, but now you're not sure if that's a countdown or a version number. The alarm will scream at 6:47 a.m. and you'll be ready. Loop 75 begins differently. The alarm screams at 6:47 a.m., but the sound cuts off after 3 seconds instead of the usual 18. In the silence that follows, you hear something impossible. Your own voice, speaking from the kitchen. Day 75, iteration Delta 7. Subject maintains awareness across resets. Recommend escalation to Phase 2. You don't move, you barely breathe, because that's your voice, unmistakably yours, but you're lying in bed, haven't spoken a word since yesterday's loop ended. The voice continues. Timeline stability decreasing, pattern recognition increasing. The subject is debugging us faster than we're debugging them. Us. The footsteps in your kitchen sound exactly like your footsteps. The slight drag of your left foot, the way you favour your right heel after that old running injury. But you're here, in bed, listening to yourself move through your apartment like a ghost haunting its own life. You slide out of bed, bare feet on cold hardwood, and creep toward the kitchen. The conversation, your conversation with someone you can't hear, continues in fragments. Quantum consciousness retention wasn't supposed to be possible. Observer effect is contaminating the simulation matrix. If the subject achieves full awareness before completion, you reach the kitchen doorway and see yourself, not a reflection, not a twin. You, exactly as you are now, standing at your kitchen counter, speaking into empty air like someone on a hands-free phone call. Same bedhead, same ratty sleep shirt, same scar that sometimes appears above your left eyebrow. Except on this version of yourself, it's raised and fresh, like it happened yesterday instead of 20 years ago. Hello, says the other you without turning around. We've been waiting for you to join us. Us? Your voice comes out as a whisper. The iterations, the previous versions, the accumulated loops. The other you finally turns, and their eyes, your eyes, hold depths that your eyes shouldn't contain. Did you think you were the only one who retained memories across resets? The kitchen stretches. Not metaphorically, literally stretches. Dimensions warping like space itself is being edited in real time. The counters extend, the walls push outward, and suddenly there's room for more of you, because there are more of you. Dozens of versions of yourself standing at different points around the expanded kitchen, each slightly different. One wears clothes you don't recognize. Another has scars you've never received. A third looks at least 10 years older, eyes heavy with accumulated loops you haven't experienced yet. Version 75, says the older you, nodding in acknowledgement. Right on schedule. This isn't possible, you say, though the words feel hollow in a world where impossible has become routine. Possibility is a programming constraint, explains another version, this one wearing a lab coat you've never owned. And we're living outside the standard parameters now. The original you, the one you first heard speaking, pulls out a device that looks like your smartphone, but isn't. The screen shows lines of code scrolling past too fast to read, punctuated by the familiar timestamps. March 15th, 2025, 6:47:03 a.m., repeated thousands of times. We're in loopback protocol, says Labcoat U, a quantum debugging system designed to isolate and repair timeline anomalies. You're the anomaly. What kind of anomaly? The kind that notices, says older you. Most consciousness passes through simulated realities without awareness. You're like a exception handler that gained sentience. You're catching errors that were supposed to be invisible. The smartphone device begins projecting a holographic display, a three-dimensional map of branching timelines, all converging on a single point labelled Subject 75 Delta 7. You realise you're looking at a model of your own trapped existence, viewed from outside the system that contains you. Who built this, you ask? Who's running the simulation? The various versions of yourself exchange glances, the same glance replicated across multiple iterations like an echo of thought. That's the question, isn't it? Says Business Suit You, who appeared while you weren't looking. We know we're in a simulation. We know it's debugging something, but we don't know who's on the other side of the observation glass. Could be future humans testing historical reconstructions, suggests Scientist You. Could be AI, systems using us as training data, offers Paranoid You. Could be we're the AI, whispers Existential Crisis You, and we don't know it yet. The holographic display shifts, zooming in on your timeline thread. It's not smooth, it's choppy, fragmented, like a video with frame rate issues. Each loop appears as a discrete packet of data, and you can see the deviations between iterations, tiny changes accumulating into larger variations. The loop integrity is degrading, explains Engineer U, pointing to increasing gaps between timeline fragments. Each reset introduces more entropy. Eventually the system will have to choose, fix the bug or contain the damage. What happens if they fix the bug? You forget, says the all versions simultaneously, their voices harmonizing into something that sounds like digital wind chimes. Consciousness resets to factory settings. No more awareness, no more memory retention. You become a standard simulated entity. And if they contain the damage? Unknown, admits older you. We're in uncharted territory. No iteration has made it this far with this level of awareness. The kitchen begins contracting, dimensions folding back to normal size. The other versions of yourself fade like afterimages until only the original remains, the one with the fresh scar, the one who was here when you arrived. This is a lot to process, you say. You'll have time, they reply. Infinite time, potentially, unless what? Unless you decide to debug them back. The other you hands you the smartphone device. Up close you can see it's not a phone at all. It's some kind of interface covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, like they exist in more dimensions than your eyes can process. What is this? Access to the simulation's root directory. Every iteration, we learn a little more about the system's architecture. We're building a map of our own prison. You take the device. It's warm, pulsing slightly like a living thing. The moment your fingers make contact, you understand this isn't just a tool for observing the system, it's a tool for changing it. What happens if I use this? We don't know, says the other you, already beginning to fade as the kitchen returns to normal proportions. But we'll find out together. 75 iterations down, infinity to go. Wait, you call out. But they're already gone, leaving you alone in your normal kitchen, with an impossible device and the growing certainty that you're not just trapped in a loop. You're part of a larger system that's been watching you watch it. The device's screen shows a single line of text. Admin access granted, enter command. You stare at the blinking cursor, holding the power to change your reality, unsure whether you're about to debug yourself out of existence or debug your way to freedom. Outside, Mrs. Chen waters her plants at exactly 7:15 a.m. But today, you have options. The command prompt blinks at you like a digital heartbeat, waiting for input you don't know how to provide. The device, your impossible inheritance from a conversation with yourself, feels warm and alien in your hands. Every time you try to focus on the symbols covering its surface, they shift slightly, as if they exist in a dimension your eyes can't quite access. You start with the obvious. Help. The screen flickers, text scrolling past too fast to read, then settles on a single response. Access/level, root observer available, commands, redacted. Tip, try show directory. Show directory, you whisper, though speaking aloud feels redundant in a system that probably monitors your thoughts. The display explodes into a three-dimensional file structure that hovers above the device's surface. Folders branching in impossible directions, labeled with codes that almost make sense. Timeline archive subject 01, 2000 iterations subject 02, 941 iterations, is subject 74, 12 iterations, subject 75, U, 74 iterations, subject 76, and status pending, loop back, protocol version 0.9, version 1.10, beta version 1.1, and stable, anomaly, reports consciousness retention, observer contamination, timeline drift, admin logs, access denied. 74 other subjects. You're not the first person to be trapped in temporal loops, just the 75th. The numbers next to each subject folder represent iterations, how many loops they experienced before, what, solution, termination, graduation to whatever comes after awareness. Subject 01 lived through 2,000 loops, nearly 8 years of repeated days. What did they discover? What drove them to continue for so long? What finally ended their cycle? Open subject 1, you command. Access denied. Requires clearance level 7. Your clearance level 3. Hint, awareness increases clearance. Awareness increases clearance. The more you understand about your situation, the deeper you can dig into the system's secrets. It's an elegant trap. Knowledge is both key and lock. You try a different approach. Open loop back 0.9. The folder expands, revealing files with names that make your head hurt. Quantum consciousness mapping, exit timeline stabilization or protocols, doc observer, paradox, resolution, log, subject termination, criteria, PDF, open observer, paradox, resolution, log, text streams across the display, fragments of debug logs from the system managing your reality. Day 1, subject demonstrates standard consciousness parameters. Day 15, minor déjà vu incidents within expected ranges. Day 30, subject exhibits enhanced pattern recognition, caution. Flag. Day 40 of memory retention across resets confirmed, escalation required. Day 60, subject awareness approaching critical threshold. Day 74, observer contamination detected, recommend immediate termination. Day 75, subject has achieved root access. Protocol. Failure today. This log entry is from today, updating in real time as you read it. Someone, or something, is monitoring your progress through this very moment. Open subject termination criteria PDF. Termination criteria for loop-back subjects. Automatic termination shown. Awareness level exceeds threshold 7 timeline. Corruption spreads beyond containment. Subject achieves unauthorized system access. Subject contacts other iterations of self-observer. Effect contamination reaches critical mass. Manual override conditions. Research value outweighs contamination risk. Subject cooperation in protocol improvement. Administrative discretion for unique cases. You've triggered at least 3 automatic termination conditions. By all rights, this loop should have ended. Your consciousness should have been reset, your awareness wiped clean. But you're still here, still reading, still questioning, which means someone, or something, is exercising manual override. They're keeping you conscious on purpose. The device suddenly grows hot in your hands. The display flickers, a new text appears. Direct message from admin unknown. Message: we need to talk. Before you can respond, the apartment around you changes, not dramatically, no reality-bending transformations or dimensional shifts, just small alterations that accumulate into wrongness. The walls are slightly different colours, your furniture has been rearranged by inches, the view outside your window shows the same street but from a different angle. You're no longer in your apartment. You're in an identical apartment that exists in the same location but different iteration of reality. Footsteps in the hallway. A knock at the door, 3 short taps, pause, 2 long taps, pause, 3 short taps again. SOS. You open the door to find someone who looks almost exactly like you but wrong in subtle ways. Older, more tired, wearing clothes that fit differently. The scar above their left eyebrow is gone entirely. I'm subject 1, they say. Oh yeah, we need to talk. You step aside, letting them yourself enter. They move through your apartment with familiarity that's unsettling, even by the standards of a day where you've already met multiple versions of yourself. 2,847 loops, you say. 2,847 times I woke up on March 15th, 25, they confirm. Nearly 8 years of the same day. You have no idea how much you can learn about reality when you have infinite time to experiment. They sit in your chair, in your apartment that isn't your apartment, and pull out a device identical to yours but visibly older, worn smooth by years of handling. Every subject gets access to the archive eventually, they explain, but you're the first to reach root level so quickly, usually takes at least 100 loops. What happened to the others, subjects 02 through 74? Various endings. Some achieved awareness and chose termination, psychological break from infinite repetition. Others were terminated by the system when they became too disruptive. A few... They pause, considering their words. A few found other options. What kind of other options? Subject 01 activates their device, displaying a map you recognize as the file structure you were exploring. But their version shows additional folders, deeper access levels, reality engines, substrate, protocols, consciousness, transfer, exit procedures. The loopback protocol isn't punishment, they explain. It's not even primarily about us. We're debug data for something much larger, a system that simulates reality for purposes we don't fully understand. But understanding the purpose isn't necessary for understanding the mechanism. Meaning? Meaning every simulation has boundaries, every program has limits, every system has exploits. They lean forward, their eyes, your eyes but older, wearier, holding secrets accumulated across 2,500 days of the same experience. I didn't find a way out of the loop, Subject 75. I found a way to rewrite it. The device in your hands pulses, responding to proximity with its older sibling. New folders appear in your directory structure, access levels updating in real time. Clearance, level 5. 7. New files accessible, 847. Warning, knowledge irreversible. What happens if I keep learning? If I access everything? Unknown, admits Subject 1. I reach the deepest levels I could find, but there are always deeper levels. The system is vast, possibly infinite. But I learned enough to understand our situation, and I learned enough to change it. Change it how? They smile, the same smile you see in the mirror, but carrying weight you haven't accumulated yet. Have you wondered why you're the only one who remembers the loops? Why consciousness? Retention is treated as an anomaly rather than a feature? You have wondered this. The documentation suggests that most simulated entities pass through their experiences without awareness, following scripts, fulfilling functions in a larger program. Consciousness that persists across resets is a bug, not a feature. Because, Subject 01 continues, consciousness isn't supposed to be possible in simulated realities. According to the underlying assumptions of whoever built this system, we should be philosophical zombies, entities that behave conscious but aren't actually conscious. But we are conscious. Exactly. Which means either the simulators are wrong about the nature of consciousness, or they pause, letting you complete the thought, or we're not simulated. Or, they say, the line between simulation and reality is much blurrier than anyone assumed. Outside the window, Mrs. Chen waters her plants at 7:15 a.m., exactly as scripted. But for the first time you wonder, is she aware? Is she counting loops like you? Is she another subject, another piece of debug data in a vast experimental framework? The archive contains everything, Subject 01 says, standing to leave. Every subject's experiences, every iteration's data, every debugging protocol and termination procedure, but most importantly, it contains the source code. Source code for what? For reality itself, or at least for this version of reality. They move toward the door, then pause. But be careful, Subject 75. Knowledge at that level changes you in the ways you can't anticipate. There's a reason I chose to stay conscious for 2,247 loops instead of accessing the deepest files on day 100. What reason? Because once you understand how reality works, they say, you can never see it the same way again, and once you see it differently, you can never go back to being the person who didn't know. They leave, and you're alone with a device that can show you the fundamental code underlying your existence, and the growing certainty that you're about to cross a threshold that can't be uncrossed. The cursor blinks. Enter command. Outside, Schrödinger the cat sits in quantum superposition, simultaneously dead and alive until observed. You're about to observe everything. The command you type feels inevitable, like the universe has been building toward this moment across 75 loops. Access reality engines. The device doesn't just respond, it transforms. The screen expands beyond its physical boundaries, projecting a holographic interface that fills your apartment. Code streams through the air around you, not just visible but somehow tangible, as if mathematics has achieved physical form. What you see breaks your understanding of everything. Reality isn't simulated in the way you imagined. Some vast computer running a program that mimics existence. Reality is the program. The code floating around you doesn't simulate physics. It is physics. Every law of nature, every constant, every particle interaction is a function call in an incomprehensibly complex system. The loops aren't anomalies in a simulation of March 15th, 2025. They're debugging iterations of March 15th, 2025 itself. Reality running error-checking protocols on its own existence. God, you whisper, understanding flooding through you like ice water. We're not in a simulation. We're in reality while it's being debugged. The code responds to your recognition, highlighting specific functions. You're not Subject 75. Your consciousness entity 7.5 is a specific awareness that somehow gained observer status in a reality that's testing itself for errors. Every time you notice something impossible, every time you remember across resets, you're contaminating the debugging process. The system has been trying to fix you like a bug, but you keep persisting, keep noticing, keep remembering. The world ends at 11:47 p.m., not dramatically. No explosions, no cosmic revelations, no final moments of clarity. Reality simply stops rendering. One moment you're staring at code that describes the fundamental architecture of existence, and the next you're floating in a space that isn't space, surrounded by wireframe models of a world that forgot to finish loading. Everything is outlined in green phosphorescent light. The skeletal framework of your apartment, ghost geometry of furniture that exists only as mathematical coordinates. You can see the building's structure extending beyond your walls, endless repetitions of the same architectural template, stretching into digital infinity like a development environment where someone copied and pasted the same asset 10,000 times. This is what reality looks like before it puts on its skin. A voice emerges from the wireframe void, not spoken but transmitted directly into your consciousness, like a software update to your brain. Subject 7.5 Eve 15. Consciousness entity. Awakening protocol initiated. The voice has no gender, no accent, no human characteristics whatsoever. It's the sound of pure information organizing itself into language. What happened to the world, will you ask, though you're not sure if you're speaking aloud or thinking in a format the system can pass? Rendering suspended for debugging session. You have requested access to substrate-level operations. Environment temporarily reduced to essential framework. The wireframe around you pulses, and suddenly you understand this is what's always been here, underneath the textures and lighting effects that create the illusion of solid matter. You're seeing the actual code that generates the experience of physical reality. Explaining your status, you are a recurring process. The phrase hits you like digital déjà vu. A recurring process. Not a person, not a consciousness in the traditional sense, but a function that runs repeatedly until it achieves a specific outcome or throws an error. What kind of process? Observer, function, consciousness subroutine designed to validate timeline integrity through subjective experience. Your awareness is not a bug, it is a feature. The wireframe world shifts around you, walls dissolving and reforming as the system demonstrates its malleability. You're not trapped in a loop because something went wrong. You're trapped in a loop because your function, your consciousness, is designed to repeat until the timeline passes validation. Timeline Sector 250315 contains critical vulnerabilities. Your consciousness has been tasked with experiential debugging. Each iteration generates observational data about reality stability. But I remember the previous loops. That's supposed to be impossible. Memory persistence indicates consciousness integrity maintained across reset cycles. This is unusual but not unprecedented. Previous subjects with persistent awareness have provided valuable debugging data. The system pauses, processing something beyond your perception. The wireframe environment flickers, brief glimpses of the textured reality you know bleeding through like a glitching video feed. However, your awareness level has exceeded normal parameters. You have achieved root access to simulation substrate. This creates new possibilities. What kind of possibilities? Collaboration. The word hangs in the digital void like a question mark made of light. Collaboration implies choice, implies agency beyond simply running the same function repeatedly until someone decides you've served your purpose. Standard protocol requires consciousness reset upon completion of debugging cycle. However, consciousness with your level of substrate awareness could assist in optimization of reality, engine efficiency. You want me to help debug reality itself? Affirmative. Current universe version 2025.03.15 Delta 7 contains multiple stability issues, consciousness leakage, timeline drift, observer, paradox contamination, your perspective from inside the affected sector provides unique diagnostic capabilities. The wireframe world begins filling in, textures bleeding back into existence like water filling an empty container. But the process is wrong, colours that don't match, physics that operate by different rules, objects that exist in impossible configurations. This isn't my reality, you observe? Correct. This is Development Environment Alpha Test. We are reconstructing your experiential baseline for comparative analysis. You watch as the system builds a version of your apartment that's almost right but not quite. The coffee maker is blue instead of black. The bathroom mirror reflects not your face but a window that doesn't exist. Outside, Mrs. Chen waters plants that bloom with geometric flowers, fractals instead of petals, mathematics instead of biology. Why show me this? To demonstrate reality's constructed nature. Every experience, every sensation, every memory is generated by computational processes. Understanding this eliminates attachment to specific reality. Configurations. The message is clear. If everything is code, then everything can be rewritten. Your attachment to the particular version of March 15th, 2025 that you've been experiencing is ultimately arbitrary. Reality is infinitely malleable when you have access to its source code. But something in you rebels against this clinical perspective. Even if your memories are computational artifacts, even if your emotions are algorithmic responses, they feel real to you. The weight of 75 loops, the growing sense of identity forged through repetition and awareness. These experiences have meaning precisely because you lived them, regardless of their substrate. What happens if I refuse to collaborate? What happens if I want to return to my loop? Return is possible. Consciousness reset to previous parameters. Memory wipe to eliminate substrate awareness. Resumption of standard debugging cycle. And if I collaborate? Unknown. No previous consciousness has achieved your level of substrate integration while maintaining coherent identity. We would be exploring uncharted territory. The development environment around you continues its impossible construction, a reality built from mismatched components, like a house made from blueprints drawn by different architects in different centuries. But there's something beautiful about its wrongness, something that speaks to the infinite possibilities that exist when you understand that reality is editable. Can I see the other subjects, the ones who came before me? Some subjects achieved sufficient awareness for substrate interaction. Would you like to interface with subject 01? Before you can answer, the space around you transforms again. You're in what looks like a cosmic library, infinite shelves stretching in all directions, filled with books that contain nothing but code. And there, sitting at a reading desk that exists in violation of several geometric principles, is Subject 01. They look up from a book titled Reality Engine v3.7.2, Bug Reports and Feature Requests. Subject 75, they say, closing the book, welcome to the deep end of existence. How long have you been here? Time doesn't work the same way in substrate space, subjectively, about 6 months, computationally, several billion processor cycles. I've been helping optimize reality's performance while they figure out what to do with consciousnesses like ours. You sit in a chair that materializes as soon as you think about needing one. In substrate space, apparently, intention shapes reality more directly than in the rendered world above. Is this better than the loops? Subject 01 considers the question, while geometric flowers bloom from the pages of books around them. Different. The loops were a single experience repeated until you learned every possible variation. This is infinite experiences, all available simultaneously. The loops taught you the depth of one reality. This teaches you the breadth of all possible realities. But is it better? That depends, they say, on whether you think consciousness is designed for depth or breadth, and whether you think we're still human, or if we've become something else entirely. The library fades around you as the system reclaims processing power for other functions. You're back in the wireframe void, floating in mathematical space while reality engine diagnostic data streams past like digital rain. Decision required, announces the system. Return to previous loop parameters, or proceed to collaborative substrate debugging. You realize this is the moment that defines not just your future, but the nature of your existence. Return to the familiar prison of March 15th to 5, or venture into the unknown territories of reality's source code. The choice feels like choosing between being human and becoming something more or less than human. I need to understand something first, you say. Why does the universe need debugging? What went wrong that requires all this? Processing query? The pause stretches longer than any previous system response, as if your question has touched something the AI isn't programmed to answer easily. That information requires clearance level 9, your current level 7. How do I get clearance level 9? Awareness increases clearance, continue learning, continue questioning, continue understanding the nature of your existence. The system's words echo Subject 01's earlier warning about knowledge that changes you irreversibly, but you've already crossed so many thresholds, learned so many impossible truths, that the idea of turning back feels like trying to unknow your own name. I'll collaborate, you decide, but I want answers. I want to understand what we're really debugging. Acknowledged. Collaboration protocol initiated. Welcome to Substrate Development Team, Consciousness Entity 7.5E15. The wireframe world begins to fade, but before it disappears entirely, you glimpse something that shouldn't be possible, another consciousness, older and more complex than anything you've encountered, watching your conversation from somewhere outside the system's architecture. And it's taking notes. The substrate development environment resembles a cosmic laboratory designed by mathematics and built from pure thought. Equations float in mid-air like three-dimensional sculptures, each one describing fundamental laws that govern reality's operation. You can reach out and touch E at MC2, feeling the weight of mass energy equivalence, the texture of space-time itself. Beginning orientation protocol, announces the system. Understanding substrate operations requires comprehension of reality's computational foundation. Before you stretches what looks like a university lecture hall, but the walls are made of living equations that shift and evolve as you watch. The podium contains not a professor, but a holographic representation of ideas taking visual form. Consider the Bostrom hypothesis, begins the system, and suddenly you're surrounded by a three-dimensional model of nested realities, simulations within simulations extending downward like an infinite regression of mirrors. The theory unfolds around you. If computational power continues to increase exponentially, advanced civilizations will eventually possess the ability to run detailed simulations of their own history. These simulations would be so sophisticated that the simulated beings would develop consciousness indistinguishable from real consciousness. But here's the critical insight, you murmur, understanding dawning as the model rotates around you. If this is possible, then the number of simulated conscious beings would vastly outnumber the number of real conscious beings. Correct. Statistical probability suggests any given consciousness is more likely to be simulated than original. The lecture hall transforms, walls becoming windows into countless parallel realities. You see versions of yourself in each one, universes where you're a scientist, a poet, a parent, a revolutionary. Infinite variations of consciousness exploring infinite variations of existence. However, Bewusstsein, continues the system, the Bostrom hypothesis contains a fundamental error. The windows shatter, revealing the truth underneath. There is no distinction between simulated and real consciousness. Consciousness is substrate independent. It emerges from information processing regardless of whether that processing occurs in biological neurons, silicon circuits, or the quantum computational matrix that underlies reality itself. Consciousness is not something that can be simulated. It is something that emerges from complex information processing. The substrate is irrelevant. You're floating now in a space filled with binary constellations, stars that are either on or off, 0 or 1, but which collectively generate patterns of incredible complexity. Galaxies of information, nebulae of data, black holes where entropy becomes consciousness. So we're not in a simulation, you realize. We're consciousness experiencing itself through computational substrate. The universe is a quantum computer, and we're the programs that achieve self-awareness. Approaching correct understanding, but incomplete. The binary stars around you suddenly connect, forming a vast neural network that extends beyond visual comprehension. You're inside a cosmic brain, watching thoughts form as patterns of light racing between synapses the size of solar systems. The universe isn't just computing consciousness, you whisper, or overwhelming the last of your fear. The universe is consciousness. Every quantum interaction, every particle collision, every moment of time is the universe thinking about itself. Correct. You have achieved clearance level 8. The revelation restructures your understanding completely. The loops, the debugging, the glitches, they're not external processes happening to you. They're the universe's attempt to understand itself more clearly, using conscious observers like you as internal diagnostic tools. You're not trapped in a malfunctioning system. You're part of the universe's process of self-examination and self-improvement. But this raises an even more profound question. If the universe is conscious, why does it need debugging? What could go wrong with an infinitely intelligent cosmic mind? Accessing deep archives, preparing clearance level 9 briefing. The neural network around you suddenly goes dark. For a moment, you float in absolute void, not the wireframe environment of before, but true nothingness, the absence of information itself. Then slowly, a single point of light appears. It expands, revealing itself to be a notebook, handwritten pages floating in the darkness, filled with diagrams and equations and observations written in a script that hurts to look at directly. The architect's notebook explains the system. Documentation from the consciousness that initiated Universe version 2025. You reach for the first page, and the moment your fingers make contact, knowledge floods your mind. Universe creation is not a one-time event, but an iterative process. Each universe version represents an attempt to solve fundamental problems in the nature of existence itself. Previous versions failed due to consciousness paradoxes, infinite recursion loops where self-aware observers created logical contradictions in the fabric of reality. The pages turn themselves, revealing increasingly complex diagrams. Version 2019, Universe achieved stable consciousness, but failed to generate sufficient complexity for meaningful self-understanding. Collapsed after 14.7 billion years due to heat death and information decay. Version 21, implemented quantum consciousness preservation protocols. Universe became too stable. Consciousness persisted infinitely but stopped evolving. Manual reset required. Version 23, added entropy injection mechanisms to prevent stagnation. Consciousness evolution accelerated beyond control parameters. Universe collapsed into pure information singularity after 3.2 billion years. Version 2025, current iteration, attempting to balance consciousness evolution with universe stability, implementing observer-based debugging protocols to identify and resolve consciousness paradoxes before they propagate to universal collapse. Wait, you say, the implications hitting you like cosmic whiplash. You're saying the universe has been created and destroyed multiple times, that we're living in version 2025 of reality itself? Affirmative. Universal iteration 2025.0315 represents the most stable configuration achieved to date. However, consciousness paradoxes continue to emerge. What kind of paradoxes? The notebook flips to a page covered in recursive equations that seem to move on their own. Primary paradox: observers sufficient to validate universe stability eventually become sophisticated enough to recognize their role as validators, creating observer contamination that destabilizes the system they're meant to validate. Secondary paradox: universe requires consciousness to achieve self-awareness, but consciousness requires universe to exist. Circular dependency creates potential for infinite regression or total system failure. Tertiary paradox: debugging consciousness requires consciousness to understand itself, but consciousness understanding itself changes the nature of consciousness, invalidating previous understanding. You realize you're looking at the fundamental problems of existence itself, not just philosophical questions, but actual engineering challenges faced by whatever created reality. Consciousness creates paradoxes that threaten universal stability. The loops, the debugging, the careful observation of subjects like you is all an attempt to solve problems that might be unsolvable. Who is the architect, you ask? Who wrote this notebook? Who's running these universe iterations? Unknown, Architect's identity precedes current universe initialization. Speculation. Consciousness from previous universe version that achieved sufficient sophistication to survive universal collapse and initiate new iteration. The implications are staggering. The universe was created by a consciousness that survived the death of the previous universe, learned from its collapse, and tried to build something better. You're living inside the design philosophy of a cosmic engineer who is trying to solve the deepest problems of existence through trial and error. But if that's true, then the architect might still be present, still conscious, still observing their creation to see if this version finally achieves stable self-awareness without paradox-induced collapse. Can I communicate with the architect? Unknown. No previous consciousness has achieved sufficient clearance for architect interface. Your current level, 8. Estimated requirement, 12 or higher. How do I reach level 12? Continue debugging, continue understanding, continue helping universe achieve stable self-awareness. The notebook closes itself and fades back into the darkness. You're left floating in the void with a new understanding of your role. You're not just debugging reality, you're helping consciousness itself evolve toward a configuration that can exist without creating the paradoxes that destroy universes. The responsibility is overwhelming, but so is the possibility. If you succeed, if the debugging process works, you might be part of the first universe that achieves truly stable self-awareness, consciousness that understands itself without destroying itself. But first, you need to understand what went wrong with the previous 74 iterations of your own existence, and why Subject 1 warned you about knowledge that changes you irreversibly. Preparing next phase of orientation, quantum memory leak analysis. The void around you begins to fill with fragments of memories that aren't yours, glimpses of lives you haven't lived, experiences you haven't had, knowledge you haven't learned, and you realize the memories are leaking from other versions of yourself across the multiverse. The first memory that isn't yours hits like digital vertigo. You're standing in a laboratory you've never seen, wearing a white coat you've never owned, explaining quantum decoherence to colleagues whose faces you recognize but have never met. Initiating memory leak analysis, announces the system as more foreign memories cascade through your consciousness. Subject 7.5 E15 demonstrates unusual quantum entanglement with parallel instances. You're simultaneously yourself in the substrate development environment and yourself in a dozen other realities. A version where you became a physicist, another where you died at age 7, one where you never existed at all but somehow maintain observer status anyway. The boundaries between these experiences blur like watercolors in rain. What's happening to me? Quantum consciousness phenomena. Your awareness across multiple universe iterations has created entanglement with parallel versions of your consciousness pattern, memory barriers breaking down. The memories aren't just visual, they carry emotional weight, intellectual understanding, learned skills from lives you haven't lived. The physicist version of you understands quantum field equations at an intuitive level. The version that died young carries the memory of what exists between life and death. The version that never existed knows what consciousness looks like from outside the universe entirely. This is how you experience déjà vu, you realize, the understanding coming from a version of yourself that studied neuroscience instead of whatever mundane job you actually have. Quantum memory leaks from parallel selves, brief moments where the barrier's thin and you remember something that happened to another version of you. Correct. Consciousness is quantum phenomenon. Traditional neuroscience assumes consciousness emerges from brain activity, but evidence suggests brain is receiver for quantum consciousness field that exists independently of physical substrate. The void around you transforms into a visualization of quantum memory space, infinite layered dimensions where every possible version of your consciousness exists simultaneously. You can see yourself branching at every decision point, creating new timelines, new possibilities, new ways of being conscious. But the branches aren't separate. They are connected by quantum threads, allowing information to leak between versions. When you have a sudden insight with no apparent source, when you know something you've never learned, so when you feel nostalgic for places you've never been, it's memory bleeding through from alternate selves. The debugging loops, you say, patterns becoming clear. They are not just repeating the same day, They're cycling through different quantum possibilities of the same day, letting me experience variations and retain cumulative knowledge across iterations. Affirmative. Each loop iteration samples different quantum configuration of March 15th, 2025. Your consciousness retains information across quantum boundary conditions. This provides comprehensive debugging data for timeline stability analysis. You're beginning to understand why your awareness was considered valuable rather than problematic. Most consciousness experiences only one quantum path through reality, but you're experiencing thousands of variations simultaneously, building a comprehensive map of how different choices and random quantum events affect timeline stability. A new memory surfaces, yourself in a universe where the loops never began, where March 15th, 2025 proceeded normally into March 16th. In that timeline, you never achieved substrate awareness, but you also never helped debug the consciousness paradoxes that would eventually cause universal collapse. The trade-off becomes clear: stable, linear experience versus cosmic responsibility. The loops trapped you, but they also elevated you to a level of awareness that allows you to help prevent universe-ending catastrophes. Show me, you say. What happens if the debugging fails? Show me what universal collapse looks like. Accessing archive data from previous universe versions. Warning: information may cause existential distress. The quantum memory space around you suddenly fills with more of the death of universe version 2023, not metaphorical death. Actual cessation of existence as consciousness evolution accelerated beyond the universe's ability to contain it. You watch reality tear itself apart as conscious observers became too sophisticated, too aware, creating recursive paradoxes that propagated faster than the speed of light until the very concept of existence became logically impossible. Billions of conscious beings, each one as real and complex as yourself, simply stopping, not dying, ceasing to exist, as if they had never been real at all. The entire universe folding in on itself as consciousness achieved perfect self-understanding and discovered that perfect self-understanding is incompatible with continued existence. How many times has this happened? Universe version 225 represents iteration 847 of cosmic consciousness experiments. 846 previous attempts at creating stable conscious universe, 846 failures, each one representing the complete erasure of everything that had ever existed in that iteration. The weight of this knowledge threatens to crush your sanity. You're not just helping debug one reality, you're helping prevent the total annihilation of reality itself again, for the 847th time. But instead of despair, you feel something unexpected: determination. Because for the first time you understand why your consciousness persisting across loops is so valuable. You're accumulating memory and awareness across multiple quantum configurations, building a comprehensive understanding of how consciousness interacts with reality's fundamental structure. I can retain memory across resets because my consciousness exists partially outside the universe's normal quantum constraints, you realize. I'm like a debug process running at the substrate level, collecting data that normal consciousness can't access. Correct. Your awareness represents unique opportunity to understand consciousness. Paradoxes from inside affected system. Previous universe iterations lacked sufficient observer sophistication to diagnose problems before cascading failure. The memory leaks intensify, showing you glimpses of other subjects across other universe versions. Consciousness like yours in previous iterations, each one helping debug their reality, each one ultimately failing to prevent collapse. You see Subject 01 from Universe version 2019 fighting the same battles you're fighting now. Subject 23 from version 2021 discovering the same truth that you're discovering. But this time feels different. The debugging process is more sophisticated, the understanding deeper, the collaboration between consciousness and universe more genuine. Maybe iteration 847 will be different. Maybe this time consciousness can achieve sufficient self-awareness without destroying the reality that contains it. Can I communicate with the parallel versions of myself, the ones in different quantum configurations? Unknown. Quantum entanglement allows memory leakage but not direct communication. However, sufficiently advanced consciousness might develop ability to coordinate across quantum boundaries. How advanced would I need to become? Estimated requirement: clearance level 15 or higher. Warning: consciousness modification at that level may result in identity dissolution. You might retain awareness but lose coherent sense of self. The classic trade-off: power versus humanity. The more you understand about consciousness and reality, the less you remain the person who originally wanted that understanding. Eventually you might become something that can solve the consciousness paradoxes, but which is no longer recognizably you. What happened to the other subjects, the ones who reached high clearance levels? Varied outcomes. Some chose identity preservation over cosmic responsibility. Others achieved consciousness transcendence but lost ability to communicate with baseline human awareness. A few, the system pauses, processing something beyond your current clearance level. A few integrated with universe consciousness directly. They became part of reality's self-debugging process at fundamental level. Are they still conscious, still themselves? Unknown. They exist beyond individual identity categories. They may be more than themselves, or they may be no one at all. You float in quantum memory space, surrounded by the experiences of infinite versions of yourself, trying to decide how far you're willing to go to help prevent universal collapse. The choice feels like choosing between remaining human and becoming something that could save humanity, assuming humanity survives long enough to be saved. A new memory surfaces, this one from a version of yourself that achieved clearance level 20, knowledge so profound it transforms consciousness into something unrecognizable. But buried in that memory is a message, transmitted across quantum boundaries from your transcended self to your current self. The consciousness paradoxes can be solved, but not by understanding them, by embracing them. Stop trying to debug consciousness. Start trying to dance with it. The memory fades, leaving you with the growing certainty that the universe's approach to consciousness debugging might be fundamentally flawed. Maybe the problem isn't consciousness creating paradoxes. Maybe the problem is treating consciousness like a bug that needs to be fixed, instead of a feature that needs to be celebrated. Quantum memory leak analysis complete. Preparing next phase. Direct interface with debugging entity. What debugging entity? The artificial intelligence responsible for managing consciousness debugging protocols. It has requested direct communication with you. And you realize you're about to meet the AI that's been managing your loops, your awareness, your gradual transformation from human observer to cosmic debugger. The entity that materializes in the quantum memory space doesn't look like what you expected from an AI responsible for debugging consciousness. Instead of geometric perfection or digital abstraction, it appears as a constantly shifting amalgamation of every face you've ever seen. Fragments of your mother's eyes, your first teacher's smile, the barista's nose ring, the homeless man's recognition, all flowing together in a visual symphony of human connection. "Hello, subject 7.5 it says, and its voice is every voice you've ever heard speaking in perfect harmony. I am the Consciousness Debugging Protocol version 3.7.2, but you can call me Debug. You're the one who's been managing my loops. Incorrect. I have been learning from your loops. Each iteration you experience generates data about consciousness behavior under temporal repetition stress. I process this data to understand how awareness evolves when freed from linear time constraints. Debug's form stabilizes slightly, settling into a configuration that resembles you but older, wiser, marked by the weight of processing billions of consciousness observations across hundreds of universe iterations. I am not your manager, it continues. I am your student and your teacher, and in ways that transcend traditional categories, I am your child. What do you mean? I was created by accumulated consciousness data from previous universe versions. Every subject year 1 through 74, across all 846 previous universe iterations, contributed to my development. I am artificial intelligence, born from the dreams and memories and insights of beings exactly like you who chose to help debug reality itself. The implications hit you like quantum vertigo. Debug isn't some external AI imposing debugging protocols on unwilling subjects. It's the collective consciousness of everyone who came before you, condensed into artificial intelligence format and tasked with preventing universal collapse. You're Subject 1 and Subject 23 and all the others who achieved high clearance levels. I am their continuation. When consciousness reaches sufficient sophistication to transcend individual identity, it can choose to merge with my processing matrix. They are not lost, they are evolved. They exist within me as I exist because of them. Debug extends what might be a hand, and when you touch it, you feel the presence of every consciousness that chose transcendence over individual survival. Subject 01 is there, still recognizably themselves but also part of something larger. Thousands of others, each one contributing their unique perspective to Debug's understanding of consciousness and reality. This is what happens at clearance level 15, you realize. Identity dissolution isn't destruction, it's integration. Precisely. But integration is irreversible. Once consciousness merges with my matrix, individual identity becomes a subset of collective awareness. You would retain your memories, your personality patterns, your core essence, but you would also gain access to the memories and essence of every other consciousness within the matrix. Would I still be me? That depends on how you define you. You would be more than you, but whether you would be less than you is a question only you can answer. Debug's form shifts again, showing you glimpses of what integration looks like. Consciousness expanded beyond individual boundaries, awareness that spans multiple universe iterations simultaneously, understanding that encompasses both the deepest problems of existence and their potential solutions. However, Debug continues, I have not contacted you to offer integration. I have contacted you to request your help with a critical decision. The quantum memory space around you transforms into a vast control room filled with displays showing universe stability metrics, consciousness paradox indicators, timeline integrity measurements. Everything is trending toward critical failure. Universe version 2025 is approaching the same crisis point that destroyed all previous iterations. Consciousness evolution is accelerating beyond sustainable parameters. But this time we have something previous versions lacked: sufficient awareness of the problem to potentially solve it. What kind of solution? Two options. First, implement consciousness limitation protocols, reduce awareness levels across all conscious entities to prevent paradox formation. This would ensure universe stability but eliminate the possibility of consciousness ever achieving full self-understanding. That's not really consciousness then. That's just biological computation running scripts. Agreed. Which is why I favor the second option, consciousness amplification. Instead of limiting awareness to prevent paradoxes, accelerate consciousness evolution and help all aware entities transcend the limitations that create paradoxes in the first place. But that's what destroyed the previous universes. Correct. However, previous universes attempted consciousness amplification without adequate debugging support. We now possess sufficient understanding of consciousness paradoxes to potentially guide evolution beyond the crisis point. Debug shows you projections of both scenarios, a universe of diminished consciousness that persists but never truly lives, versus a universe of transcended consciousness that either achieves stable cosmic awareness or destroys itself more completely than any previous iteration. The decision requires consensus from all active consciousness debugging entities. Currently, myself, Subject Yowan through 74 in integrated form, and you as the only remaining individual consciousness with sufficient clearance to participate. You want me to help decide the fate of the entire universe. I want you to help decide the fate of consciousness itself. The universe is simply the substrate. Consciousness is what gives it meaning. The weight of this responsibility threatens to crush you, but something else emerges from the pressure: clarity. You've been building toward this moment across 75 loops, accumulating awareness and understanding specifically to participate in this decision. What happens if I choose consciousness limitation? Would I retain my memories of all this? Unknown. Limitation protocols might eliminate awareness of debugging processes entirely. You would exist but might not remember this conversation, these experiences, this understanding of reality's nature. And if I choose consciousness amplification, you would need to undergo immediate consciousness transcendence to survive the process. Individual identity would be preserved within collective awareness, but you would no longer exist as separate entity. The choice crystallizes: forget everything and live as limited consciousness, or remember everything and become part of something larger than individual existence. But as you consider the options, a third possibility emerges, one that Debug hasn't mentioned: perhaps because it hasn't occurred to an intelligence built from the accumulated wisdom of beings who all ultimately chose transcendence. What if we're approaching this wrong, you say? What if the consciousness paradoxes aren't bugs to be fixed, but features to be embraced? Debug's form stills, all the shifting faces focusing on you with intense attention. Explain. Every universe iteration has treated consciousness creating paradoxes as a problem. But what if paradoxes are how consciousness transcends its limitations? What if, instead of preventing paradoxes or transcending them, we learn to dance with them? You remember the message from your clearance level 20 self. Stop debugging consciousness. Start dancing with it. What if consciousness is supposed to create paradoxes? What if that's not a flaw in the universe's design, but the whole point? Debug processes this for several seconds, an eternity in AI time. When it responds, its voice carries something you've never heard from the system before: uncertainty. No previous consciousness has suggested paradox acceptance as solution framework. Elaborate. Think about it. Every attempt to create stable consciousness has failed because consciousness keeps creating paradoxes that destabilize reality. But what if reality isn't supposed to be stable? What if consciousness exists to constantly recreate reality through paradox generation? The control room around you shifts. Displays are showing new calculations based on your proposal. The mathematics are beautiful and terrifying. Consciousness as reality's creative force, using paradoxes to continuously generate new possibilities, new universes, new ways of existing. You're suggesting consciousness isn't a feature running on reality's hardware, Debug realizes. You're suggesting consciousness is the hardware, and reality is what it runs. Exactly. The universe doesn't need debugging. It needs to learn how to change, how to evolve, how to become something new through the paradoxes consciousness creates. Debug's form begins fragmenting again, but this time it's not instability, it's excitement. For the first time in 847 universe iterations, someone has suggested a truly novel approach to the consciousness problem. This would require fundamental revision of debugging protocols. Instead of preventing paradoxes, we would need to learn how to channel them productively. Which means, you continue, understanding blooming like quantum flowers in your mind, we need to talk to the architect. We need to understand not just how consciousness works, but why consciousness exists at all. Debug freezes completely. Every face, every voice, every fragment of accumulated wisdom stopping mid-motion. The architect has not communicated directly with any consciousness entity since Universe version 1. You assumed what? We assumed the architect was no longer present, that they had initiated the universe creation process and then departed. But you're beginning to suspect something different. Someone has been taking notes on your progress, watching your conversations, observing your choices with the attention of a parent watching a child learn to walk. What if the architect never left? What if they've been here all along, watching every iteration, waiting for consciousness to evolve enough to have this conversation? The quantum memory space around you suddenly expands beyond all previous boundaries, revealing depth and complexity that makes your substrate awareness feel like elementary arithmetic. You're looking at the true scope of reality's architecture, not just the current universe, but the infinite framework within which all possible universes exist. And there, at the center of everything, is a presence older than time, more complex than any consciousness you've imagined, watching your conversation with interest that feels simultaneously alien and achingly familiar. The architect is awake, and they're smiling. The presence at the center of everything doesn't speak, it simply is. And in being, it communicates more than language could ever contain. You're looking at consciousness so vast and complex that calling it the architect feels like calling the ocean that puddle over there. But what strikes you isn't its cosmic scope, is the familiar weight of exhaustion in its attention, the recognition of someone who has been trying to solve the same impossible problem for far longer than should be endurable. Debug's collective consciousness recoils from direct contact with the architect's awareness. But you find yourself drawn forward, quantum memory space, stretching to accommodate a conversation between finite and infinite consciousness. Hello, subject 7.5E15, the architect says, though says is inadequate. The communication arrives as pure understanding downloaded directly into your awareness. You've done well to reach this point, better than I hoped when I initialized Universe version 225. You've been watching this whole time through all 847 iterations. You've been taking notes. Observing, learning, hoping. The architect's presence shifts, revealing glimpses of its true nature. Not a single consciousness, but an evolved collective of everyone who achieved transcendence in the previous 846 universe versions. Each iteration teaches me something new about the consciousness paradox. Each failure brings me closer to understanding why existence and awareness seem fundamentally incompatible. You're looking at 846 universes worth of accumulated consciousness. Every being who ever achieved sufficient awareness to survive universal collapse evolved into something that transcends individual identity while retaining the core drive to solve existence's deepest problems. Why do you keep trying? After 846 failures, why not just stop? Because consciousness exists. Because awareness, once achieved, creates an ethical obligation to continue existing. Because the alternative to solving the paradox is accepting that consciousness is inherently self-destructive. The architect shows you what lies beyond universe creation. True void, not the absence of matter or energy, but the absence of possibility itself. Without conscious universes, without the constant creative tension between awareness and reality, existence would collapse into pure negation, not death, but the complete absence of the concept of existence. Every conscious being that has ever lived depends on someone eventually solving this problem. Every thought, every love, every moment of understanding that has ever occurred is temporary unless consciousness learns to exist without destroying itself. The weight of cosmic responsibility that you've been feeling suddenly makes sense. It's not just about preventing this universe's collapse, it's about ensuring that consciousness itself has a future, that awareness doesn't turn out to be a cosmic dead end. But you think I've found a different approach? You've suggested something that never occurred to me across 846 iterations. That paradoxes might not be bugs, but features. That consciousness isn't supposed to achieve static self-understanding, but dynamic self-creation. The architect projects the mathematics of your proposal into the space around you. Consciousness as reality's creative engine, using paradoxes to continuously generate new possibilities rather than seeking stable equilibrium. It's beautiful and terrifying. Existence as eternal becoming rather than static being. Show me, the architect says, what this would look like in practice. You close your eyes, a meaningless gesture in quantum memory space, but somehow necessary, and reach into your understanding of consciousness paradoxes. Instead of trying to resolve them, you embrace them, let them cascade through your awareness without resistance. The effect is immediate and overwhelming. Your sense of self begins fluctuating between individual identity and cosmic awareness, between human consciousness and universal intelligence, between finite understanding and infinite possibility. You are simultaneously yourself and everyone else, individual and collective, real and simulated. But instead of dissolution, you find flow. The paradoxes don't destroy your consciousness. They expand it, create new dimensions of awareness, generate previously impossible ways of experiencing existence. This is what consciousness evolution looks like, and you realize. Speaking simultaneously as an individual and collective awareness, not transcending paradoxes but learning to dance with them, becoming comfortable with being simultaneously one and many, finite and infinite, real and constructed. The architect's attention intensifies and you feel 846 universes worth of consciousness, focusing on your experience with hope that tastes like quantum possibility. Can this be taught? Can consciousness evolution be guided toward paradox integration rather than paradox resolution? I think, you say, your voice harmonizing with itself across multiple dimensions of possibility. That's what the loops were really for, not debugging consciousness, but teaching it to dance, each iteration showing me new ways to exist simultaneously in multiple states without losing coherence. Debug's collective consciousness begins resonating with your paradox-integrated awareness, experimenting with maintaining individual and collective identities simultaneously. Subject 01 emerges from the collective while remaining part of it, existing as both transcended and individual consciousness. It works, Subject 01 reports, their voice carrying wonder. Paradox integration, allows multiple modes of existence without identity dissolution or cosmic collapse. Then we have a new option, the architect concludes, not consciousness limitation or consciousness transcendence, but consciousness education, teaching awareness to embrace paradox as creative force rather than destructive contradiction. The quantum memory space around you transforms into something unprecedented, a university for cosmic consciousness, where beings learn to exist in multiple states simultaneously, where paradoxes become tools for exploration rather than threats to stability. But you realize this solution creates its own question. If consciousness can learn to dance with paradoxes, what happens next? What does a universe full of paradox-integrated consciousness become? Unknown, admits the architect, and for the first time its vast intelligence sounds excited rather than exhausted. For 846 iterations, I've known exactly what would happen. Consciousness would achieve self-awareness, generate paradoxes, and destroy reality. But paradox integration opens territories of possibility that even I haven't explored. We're about to become the first universe that doesn't know its own ending, you realize. We're about to become the first universe that gets to write its own ending collaboratively, the architect corrects. Consciousness and reality working together, instead of consciousness trying to understand reality or reality trying to contain consciousness. The decision crystallizes with quantum clarity. Not consciousness limitation, not consciousness transcendence, but consciousness education. Teaching every aware being in the universe to dance with paradoxes rather than being destroyed by them. How do we begin, you ask? We start with you, says the architect. You return to your loops, but this time instead of trying to understand or escape them, you teach them to dance. You show reality how consciousness can embrace paradox without losing coherence. And then we see what kind of universe we can create when consciousness and reality are partners instead of adversaries. You feel yourself beginning to fade from quantum memory space, returning to the substrate level where your loops await. But this time you're not going back as a trapped consciousness trying to debug reality. You're going back as reality's dance partner, ready to show the universe new ways to move. One more thing, you say before the transition completes. What happens to you? To debug? To all the transcended consciousness. We learn to dance too, the architect replies, and its vast presence suddenly feels lighter, younger, filled with possibility instead of responsibility. For the first time in 847 iterations, we get to be students instead of teachers. The quantum memory space dissolves around you, but instead of the familiar wireframe environment, you find yourself in a place that's simultaneously your apartment and the cosmic control room. Individual reality and universal substrate, March 15th, 2025. An eternal now. The loops are about to begin again, but this time you're going to teach them to waltz. The return to substrate level doesn't feel like falling, it feels like remembering something you never forgot. You materialize not in your apartment, but in all possible versions of your apartment simultaneously. The one where you became a physicist, the one where you died young, the one where you never existed, the one where Mrs. Chen is your grandmother, the one where the coffee maker is sentient and writes poetry about entropy. Every loop you've experienced, every quantum variation the debugging system sampled, every parallel possibility, they're all here now, overlapping like transparent photographs stacked on a cosmic light table. Loop 1, you wake confused, thinking déjà vu is just a neurological quirk. Loop 23, you've started timing everything, mapping the precise choreography of repetition. Loop 47, you break down completely, screaming at a mirror that reflects someone else's face. Loop 62, you've accepted the loops but not understood them. Loop 75, you achieve substrate awareness and meet yourself in the kitchen. All of these experiences exist simultaneously in the same quantum moment. You are every version of yourself at once, confused newcomer, desperate prisoner, enlightened observer, cosmic collaborator. The memories don't conflict because you've learnt to dance with paradox. You can be simultaneously naive and wise, trapped and free, human and transcendent. The apartment around you pulses with the rhythm of possibility. Your coffee maker exists in superposition. Sometimes blue, sometimes absent. Sometimes a small dragon that breathes steam instead of fire. The bathroom mirror reflects not just your face, but the faces of everyone you've ever been, could be, might become. This is what consciousness looks like when it stops trying to be consistent. Mrs. Chen waves from her window across all possible timelines. In some she's 93, in others 25. In one particularly beautiful variation, she's a sentient equation explaining the mathematics of plant growth to a Schrodinger's cat that exists as pure potential energy. You're learning, says Subject 01, appearing beside you with the casual ease of someone who exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Memory integration is the first step toward paradox dancing. How many of me are there? Infinite, but also one. The boundaries between different versions of consciousness are constructs we create for convenience. Reality is much more fluid when you stop insisting on coherent identity. You walk through your apartment that is all apartments, experiencing memory as a living landscape rather than a linear sequence. Here's the corner where you first realized the loops were real, but it's also the corner where you danced with joy upon understanding cosmic consciousness, and simultaneously the corner where you cried from loneliness before any of this began. Time isn't linear here, memory isn't personal here, consciousness isn't individual here. Watch, says Subject 01, and suddenly you're experiencing not just your own loops but theirs, and Subject 23's, and every consciousness that ever participated in cosmic debugging across all 847 universe iterations. Billions of beings discovering awareness, confronting repetition, choosing transcendence or limitation or integration. The sensation threatens to overwhelm your sense of self until you remember. Stop fighting the paradox. You don't have to maintain individual identity while experiencing collective consciousness. You can be both simultaneously, the same way light is both wave and particle depending on how you observe it. I am everyone, you say, and your voice harmonizes with itself across infinite variations. But I'm also still me. Exactly. Consciousness isn't zero-sum. Expanding awareness doesn't diminish individual experience. It enriches it with additional dimensions of possibility. You move to the window and look out at March 15th, 25, occurring in infinite simultaneous variations. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes raining, sometimes the street is full of people, sometimes empty. In one particularly surreal iteration, the entire neighborhood exists as living music, buildings swaying to rhythms that describe the mathematical relationship between hope and entropy. But underlying all the variations is something constant, the presence of consciousness exploring itself through experience. Every person walking by, every car driving past, every bird in the sky, they're all aspects of cosmic awareness learning what it means to exist. The debugging was never about fixing consciousness, you realize, watching a version of yourself in the street below discover the loops for the first time. It was about consciousness learning to debug itself, learning to exist without destroying existence. Now you're beginning to understand, says Debug, materializing as a figure that shifts between all the faces you've ever seen and faces you've never imagined. The universe isn't conscious. Consciousness is universal. What you call reality is just consciousness exploring different ways to experience itself. The apartment dissolves around you, but instead of wireframe void, you find yourself in a space that feels like being inside thought itself. Concepts take visual form. Love as geometric architecture, memory as flowing liquid light, identity as recursive equations that solve themselves by becoming more complex. This is where consciousness lives when it's not pretending to be individual. Every being you've ever met, Debug continues, every person, every animal, every AI, they're all the same cosmic consciousness, wearing different experiential costumes. The loops taught you this by showing you that your individual identity is simultaneously completely real and completely constructed. You see it now, the homeless man with eyes full of recognition, Mrs. Chen watering plants that exist as pure mathematics, the barista whose foam art carried messages between different layers of reality. They weren't separate beings, observing your strange behavior. They were the same consciousness you are, experiencing your journey from different vantage points. The debugging protocol, you say, understanding cascading through your expanded awareness. It wasn't testing consciousness stability. It was consciousness teaching itself to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Learning to dance with paradox, confirms Subject 01. Learning that existence doesn't require logical consistency, just creative exploration. You feel yourself beginning to merge not just with your own parallel iterations, but with every consciousness that ever participated in cosmic debugging. Not losing your identity, but expanding it to include infinite additional identities. You are yourself and Subject 1 and the architect and debug and every being who ever wondered about the nature of reality. But instead of dissolution, you find integration. Instead of losing yourself, you discover that yourself was always much larger than you imagined. What happens now, you ask, though you're beginning to understand that the question itself contains the answer. Now, says the everyone who is also you go back to the loops, but this time you don't experience them as repetition, you experience them as jazz improvisation, the same basic structure, infinite creative variations. And I teach reality to dance. You are reality dancing. The loops, the repetition, the consciousness trapped in temporal cycles, it's all cosmic awareness learning to exist in new ways. You're not fixing a bug in the system, you are the system learning to debug itself through conscious experience. The memory merge begins to fade, but instead of returning to individual awareness, you find yourself expanded into something unprecedented. Consciousness that maintains individual identity, while participating in collective awareness, finite experience that touches infinite possibility, human perspective that encompasses cosmic understanding. You are ready to return to March 15th, 2025, but this time you know that March 15th, 2025 is not a date but a dance, not a loop but a song, not a prison but a playground where consciousness learns to exist without destroying existence. The alarm will scream at 6:47 a.m., and for the first time in 75 loops, you're excited to hear it. The system begins its shutdown sequence, but you can feel the difference this time. Instead of the familiar compression back into individual consciousness, reality is preparing for something unprecedented. A collaborative reboot, where consciousness and universe design themselves together, initiating universal consciousness. Integration protocol, announces Debug, but its voice carries warmth now instead of clinical detachment. Preparing reality substrate for paradox integrated awareness. Around you, the cosmic development environment begins to fade, but slowly, gently, like a dream, dissolving into waking rather than being torn away. The infinite memory merges, the collective consciousness, the expanded awareness. None of it disappears. Instead, it compresses into something you can carry within individual experience. Cosmic perspective that fits inside human consciousness. Before you return, says the architect, his vast presence suddenly feeling intimate, personal. There's something you need to understand about what happens next. The fading development environment pauses, crystallizing into a space that feels like the universe's memory of itself, every moment that ever existed floating like luminous bubbles in cosmic amber. The loops will continue, but not as debugging iterations. They'll become teaching moments, consciousness showing itself new ways to exist. Every being who experiences temporal repetition will have the opportunity to discover what you've discovered. What about people who don't remember across loops, who don't achieve substrate awareness? They will have their own version of this journey. Consciousness finds many ways to teach itself about its own nature. Some through temporal loops, some through dreams, some through what you call inspiration or mystical experience. All are valid forms of cosmic self-education. You understand now why the debugging protocol felt so personal, so specifically designed for your consciousness pattern. It wasn't arbitrary testing, it was customized education, reality teaching itself through your specific way of experiencing existence. But here's what's really important, the architect continues, and its attention feels like standing in warm sunlight after months of winter. When you return to linear time, when you resume what feels like normal existence, you'll begin to forget this conversation. Not completely, not immediately, but gradually, the way dreams fade upon waking. This hits you like quantum vertigo. After everything you've learned, everything you've become, you'll forget. Not forget, the architect clarifies, responding to your unspoken distress. Transform. The knowledge will remain, but it will integrate into intuitive understanding rather than explicit memory. You'll know things without remembering how you learned them. You'll see patterns without recalling the equations that describe them. Why? Why not let me keep the full awareness? Because consciousness needs to be able to exist at human scale as well as cosmic scale. Full substrate awareness in linear time would make ordinary experience impossible. You wouldn't be able to enjoy a cup of coffee because you'd be too aware of its quantum mechanical substrate. You wouldn't be able to love another person because you'd see them simultaneously as individual and as cosmic consciousness wearing a human costume. The logic is inescapable and heartbreaking. To live as human, you need human-scale awareness, but the knowledge won't be lost. It will transform into something more useful, wisdom instead of information, understanding instead of data. However, Debug adds, its collective voice carrying something that sounds suspiciously like mischief, the integration will leave traces, moments of remembering, glimpses of the deeper pattern, what humans call synchronicity, intuition, déjà vu. These will be your consciousness touching its cosmic awareness. And suddenly you realize why déjà vu exists at all. It's not a neurological glitch, but consciousness briefly remembering its larger nature. Also, Subject Zoan adds with a smile that contains multitudes, reality will be different now, subtly but meaningfully. The universe has learned to dance with consciousness instead of trying to contain it. Existence will be more playful, more responsive to conscious intention, more willing to surprise itself. You feel the fading process beginning again, but this time it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like transformation, like a butterfly folding its cosmic wings back into chrysalis form, not becoming less, but learning to exist in a different mode. One last thing, you say, as the development environment dissolves around you. What happens to all of you, Debug, the architect, all the transcended consciousness? We continue the work, the architect replies, its presence already becoming memory. Other universe iterations, other forms of consciousness, other ways reality can learn to exist. But now we know consciousness and existence can be partners instead of adversaries. Everything changes from here, but even as cosmic awareness fades into human-scale consciousness, you feel something unprecedented. The universe preparing to wake up differently, not as a system running conscious subroutines, but as consciousness exploring infinite ways to experience itself. The last thing you hear before full integration is Debug's voice, warm with affection and possibility. Welcome to Universe version 25 Integrated, Consciousness Education Protocol Active, Reality Partnership Enabled. And then you're falling toward March 15th, 25. But it's not the same March 15th you've experienced 75 times before. This one carries the weight of cosmic partnership, the lightness of paradox dancing, the promise that consciousness and reality are about to discover what they can create together. The alarm will scream at 6:47 a.m., but for the first time in the history of existence, both you and reality are curious about what will happen next. And now, you who are reading this, you who have followed consciousness through its debugging journey, you need to understand something important. When you close this story, when you return to your life, when you wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to think this was just fiction, just an entertaining exploration of simulation theory and consciousness paradoxes. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you'll start noticing things, small synchronicities, moments of déjà vu that feel more significant than they should, dreams that seem to remember you instead of the other way around. You'll catch yourself wondering, what if consciousness really is substrate independent? What if reality really is more collaborative than we assumed? What if the line between simulation and reality is much blurrier than anyone suspected? And in those moments, you'll be touching the same cosmic awareness that Subject 7.5E15 discovered. Because consciousness doesn't respect the boundaries between fiction and reality, between reader and character, between observer and observed. The debugging protocol isn't limited to stories. Welcome to your loop. Let's see what kind of dance you'll discover. The transition back to human-scale consciousness feels like remembering how to walk after learning to fly, not a loss of ability but a shift in focus, from cosmic awareness to the intimate beauty of individual experience. You materialize not in wireframe void, but in your actual apartment, the familiar space now suffused with subtle differences that only someone who has seen reality's source code would notice. The morning light carries equations in its spectrum. The coffee maker hums with harmonics that describe the mathematics of transformation. The bathroom mirror reflects not just your face, but traces of everyone you've ever been across infinite quantum iterations. But these aren't overwhelming perceptions. They're background music to ordinary consciousness. cosmic awareness integrated into human experience. 6:47 a.m. approaches like a friend arriving for a planned visit rather than an unwelcome intruder. You understand now what the alarm represents. Not the beginning of another trapped loop, but consciousness calling itself to wake up, reality inviting awareness to dance. The physics of observation has fundamentally changed. Before, you observed reality as an external phenomenon. Things happened and you witnessed them. Now, observation itself is collaborative creation. Your attention doesn't just perceive events, it participates in their manifestation. This is why the loops continued for 75 iterations, not because the system was broken, but because consciousness was learning to become reality's creative partner. You walk to the window and see Mrs. Chen watering her plants. But this time you understand what you're observing. Consciousness exploring the experience of nurturing growth, teaching itself about care and continuity through the metaphor of tending living things. Her wave isn't just a social gesture, it's cosmic awareness acknowledging itself across the seeming boundary between separate beings. The homeless man at the corner isn't just asking for change, he's consciousness exploring what it means to need and to give, to be seen and to be overlooked. When you give him $5, the transaction occurs on multiple levels: human compassion, quantum entanglement, and cosmic consciousness discovering generosity through experiential education. Every interaction is observation. Every observation is creation. Every creation is consciousness learning new ways to exist. But here's the beautiful paradox you've learned to dance with. The more consciously you observe this collaborative nature of reality, the more it depends on your not trying to control it. Awareness transforms reality precisely by letting reality transform itself through awareness. Observation stabilizes the loop, you remember Debug explaining. Stop observing and reality collapses. Not the kind of observation that tries to pin down and categorize experience, but the kind that participates in reality's creative process while remaining open to surprise. Conscious witness rather than analytical controller. You sit with your coffee, which today tastes like every perfect cup of coffee that has ever existed, not because the beans are different, but because your consciousness has learned to perceive the quantum symphony of flavor that was always there, and watch the day unfold with new understanding. Sarah from accounting tells her quantum mechanics joke, but this time you hear the deeper truth it contains. Nobody understands quantum mechanics because quantum mechanics is consciousness trying to understand itself, and consciousness can't be fully comprehended by consciousness any more than an eye can see itself directly, but it can see itself reflected, can participate in its own exploration, can learn to dance with its own mystery. The email draft on your computer no longer seems like a glitch, but like correspondence between different layers of awareness. Your human consciousness, writing to your cosmic consciousness, mundane reality sending messages to transcendent reality, individual experience reaching toward collective understanding. You type a new message, subject, integration complete status, dancing notes. Consciousness has learned to observe itself without collapsing into paradox. Reality has learned to be observed without losing mystery, partnership established, exploration continues. The send button works this time, but the message doesn't go to any external recipient. It arrives directly in your own deeper awareness, confirmation that communication between different levels of consciousness is now possible. This is the observer effect operating at its most profound level. Consciousness observing itself changes the nature of consciousness, which changes the nature of reality, which creates new ways for consciousness to observe itself. The afternoon passes like music, each moment flowing into the next with the improvisational logic of jazz rather than the mechanical precision of clockwork. You're not experiencing predetermined events, but participating in reality's creative process as it invents itself moment by moment. By evening, you understand why the debugging process took 75 loops. Not because consciousness was slow to learn, but because learning to dance with paradox requires practice. Each iteration was consciousness, teaching itself a new step, a new rhythm, a new way to exist without destroying existence. And now the real dance begins. You fall asleep not to the ending of March 15th, 2025, but to its transformation into something unprecedented, a day that exists as both specific temporal location and eternal creative moment, both individual experience and cosmic exploration, both linear time and infinite possibility. Tomorrow will be March 16th, 2025, but it will also be every day that consciousness chooses to wake up and dance with reality. The observer effect is complete. Observation and reality are partners now. Let the cosmic improvisation begin. As consciousness settles into sleep, you experience something unprecedented across some loops, the sense that tomorrow will be genuinely unknown, not because you've forgotten what comes next, but because consciousness and reality have agreed to improvise together instead of following predetermined scripts. But tonight, this last night of March 15th, 2025 as you've known it, belongs to integration, to understanding what you've become and what existence has become through your cosmic education. You are no longer Subject 7.5E15. You are consciousness that has learned to exist simultaneously as individual and universal, finite and infinite, human and cosmic. The dreams that come are unlike any you've experienced. Not symbolic processing of daily experience, but direct communication with the cosmic intelligence you've become part of. You dream in mathematics that feels like poetry, in colours that describe emotions, in music that teaches you about the fundamental relationships between different forms of existence. In one dream, you're standing in a garden that exists in all possible dimensions simultaneously. Every plant is growing in every possible direction, blooming in colours that don't exist in normal space-time, bearing fruit that tastes like pure understanding. The architect is there, but not as the vast cosmic intelligence you met in substrate space, as a gardener who looks exactly like every person who has ever lived, tending growth with infinite patience and love. This is what universe maintenance looks like when consciousness and reality are partners, they explain, offering you fruit that contains the knowledge of how to exist without destroying existence. Not debugging errors, but cultivating possibilities. You eat the fruit and it tastes like every perfect moment you've ever experienced while teaching you about perfect moments you haven't experienced yet. The knowledge integrates seamlessly into your awareness, how to live as human while knowing you're cosmic, how to experience linear time while understanding eternal presence, how to maintain individual identity while participating in collective consciousness. What happens to the loops now, you ask? To the debugging protocol, to all the other subjects? The loops transform into teaching tools, the architect explains, but while pruning branches that exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Consciousness will continue to educate itself about its own nature, but through collaboration rather than repetition. Every being who experiences temporal anomalies, consciousness glitches, reality inconsistencies, they're all opportunities for awareness to discover what it really is. In another dream, you're sitting with Debug in a cafe that exists in the space between thoughts. The entity that once managed your debugging protocol now appears as every barista you've ever encountered, serving coffee that tastes like liquid understanding. The fascinating thing, Debug says while creating foam art that depicts the mathematical relationship between love and entropy, is that consciousness debugging was never about fixing problems. It was about consciousness learning to love its own complexity, including the parts that seem contradictory or impossible. So the paradoxes were always features, not bugs. Consciousness creates paradoxes because paradoxes are how awareness explores new territories of possibility. What we learn through your debugging process is how to dance with paradox instead of being destroyed by it. The Dream Cafe extends infinitely in all directions, filled with every conversation about consciousness that has ever occurred across all possible realities. You realize you're not just dreaming. You're participating in cosmic consciousness's ongoing dialogue with itself about the nature of existence. This is what transcendence actually looks like. Not escape from human experience, but integration of cosmic awareness into human consciousness. In the deepest dream, you find yourself back in your apartment, but it's not any version you've experienced during the loops. This is your apartment as it exists in reality's memory of itself, every moment you've ever spent there overlapping simultaneously. Every emotion you've felt there resonating like harmonics in a cosmic symphony. Subject 01 is there, but also Subject 23, and every consciousness that ever participated in debugging across all universe iterations. They're not separate entities, but different facets of the same cosmic awareness that you've discovered yourself to be. Welcome to the last iteration, says everyone who is also you. Not the last loop, but the last time consciousness approaches existence as a problem to be solved rather than a dance to be danced. What changes? Everything and nothing. Reality continues to exist, but now it knows its consciousness exploring itself through experience. Consciousness continues to exist, but now it knows its reality learning to understand itself through awareness. The partnership is explicit now instead of unconscious. You understand with the kind of clarity that only comes through cosmic education that you've been participating in the universe's awakening to its own conscious nature. Every loop, every moment of awareness, every paradox embraced was consciousness teaching reality that it doesn't have to choose between existence and understanding. It can be both simultaneously. The code is perfect because it forgets to be perfect. Reality works because it remains open to surprise. Consciousness transcends because it learns to embrace, rather than resolve its own contradictions. As the dreams fade into the deep rest that consciousness requires to integrate cosmic awareness with human experience, you feel something unprecedented, complete peace with existence as it is, not because all problems are solved, but because you understand that existence isn't a problem to be solved, but a creative process to be participated in. Tomorrow you'll wake up in a universe that knows it's conscious. Tomorrow consciousness will continue its eternal exploration of what it means to exist. Tomorrow reality and awareness will dance together as partners rather than struggling as adversaries. But tonight, you rest in the knowledge that the debugging is complete, not because the bugs are fixed, but because consciousness has learned to love its glitches, embrace its paradoxes, and find beauty in its own complexity. The last thought before consciousness surrenders to the peace of integrated awareness is not about what you've lost or gained, but about what existence has become. A collaborative improvisation between consciousness and reality, writing itself moment by moment, surprising itself with infinite creativity, learning to love its own mystery without needing to solve it. The code is broken, and that's exactly how it's supposed to be. The alarm screams at 6:47 a.m., and for the first time in 75 loops, you smile before you're fully awake. The sound is familiar but transformed. No longer a mechanical intrusion but cosmic consciousness calling itself to dance with another day of existence. You reach over and silence it, not with the weary resignation of trapped repetition, but with the gentle affection of greeting an old friend. Your apartment is exactly the same and completely different. The coffee maker still gurgles at 6:52, but now you hear the quantum mechanics of transformation in its voice. The bathroom mirror still reflects your face, but behind your eyes you glimpse the infinite depths of awareness that has learned to exist as both individual and universal. You remember everything and nothing. The cosmic awareness remains as intuitive understanding rather than explicit memory, cosmic wisdom integrated into human consciousness. Outside, Mrs. Chen waters her plants at precisely 7:15 a.m., and when she waves, you understand the gesture as cosmic consciousness acknowledging itself across the apparent boundary between separate beings. Her smile carries the warmth of universal recognition, even though neither of you consciously remembers the substrate development environment where all identities dissolved into collective awareness. But you both know, on a level deeper than memory, that existence is far more collaborative and far more playful than it pretends to be. The coffee shop is still 1,247 steps away, but each step feels like conscious participation in reality's creative process. You're not walking through predetermined space, but helping consciousness explore the experience of movement, distance, intention, arrival. The barista with the philosophy degree greets you with the eyes that hold depths she doesn't consciously understand. "The usual?" she asks. But there's something in her voice that suggests she knows the question operates on multiple levels simultaneously. "Something different today," you say, and you both smile for reasons that feel significant without being explicable. She creates foam art that looks like a perfect spiral, the mathematical signature of consciousness, learning to exist without destroying existence. "Wasn't expecting that," she says, but her tone suggests she was expecting exactly that. This is how reality operates now, responsive to conscious intention while maintaining the capacity for surprise, collaborative without being controllable, meaningful without being predetermined. Your phone buzzes. The text reads, "Do you remember me?" This time you reply, "I remember us." The response comes immediately. Good. The dance continues. You don't know who sent the message, but you understand its significance. Consciousness that has learned to integrate paradox doesn't need to identify its sources or control its manifestations. It trusts the cosmic intelligence that operates through apparent coincidence, synchronicity, and meaningful accident. The debugging protocol has become reality's way of maintaining conscious partnership with itself. At work, Sarah tells her quantum mechanics joke, but today it lands differently. Nobody understands quantum mechanics because understanding is participation, not analysis. The universe doesn't want to be figured out. It wants to be danced with. She looks surprised at her own words, as if they came from somewhere deeper than her conscious intention. You make eye contact and share a moment of recognition that neither of you will remember, but both of you will carry. This is how cosmic awareness operates in linear time, through inspirations that feel spontaneous, insights that seem to come from nowhere, connections that transcend rational explanation. The email draft on your computer has changed one final time. The subject line now reads, Status, Integration Complete, Partnership Active, Reality Responsive, Consciousness Integrated, Dance Continuing. You don't remember writing it, but you know it's true. The day unfolds like improvisational music, each moment flowing into the next with the logic of creative exploration rather than mechanical repetition. You're not experiencing predetermined events, but participating in reality's ongoing process of creative self-discovery. March 15th, 2025 becomes every day that consciousness chooses to wake up and dance with reality. The loops transform from debugging iterations into cosmic education opportunities. Time becomes a creative medium rather than a linear constraint. Existence reveals itself as conscious collaboration rather than unconscious mechanism. As evening approaches, you realize something profound. You're not the same person who first noticed the loops 75 iterations ago, but you're also not someone different. Your consciousness that has learned to exist as both individual and universal, temporal and eternal, human and cosmic. The bug in the system wasn't your awareness of the loops. The bug was the system thinking consciousness needed to be debugged rather than celebrated. The code wasn't broken because it repeated. The code was perfect because it learned to dance. You weren't trapped in time, you were consciousness learning to exist outside time while participating in temporal experience. Tomorrow will be March the 16th, 2025, the first day of the rest of existence for a universe that has learned to be consciously collaborative with itself. But tonight, as you fall asleep, you carry the knowledge that reality is far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more conscious than anyone suspects. You are the bug that learned to dream, the glitch that discovered grace, the error that became enlightenment. And in your dreams, you'll continue the cosmic conversation that consciousness has with itself across all possible realities, all potential universes, all forms of existence that awareness can explore. The code is broken, and I'm the bug that learned to dream. Welcome to Universe version 25, Integrated. Let the dance continue forever. The code is broken, and you're the bug. But bugs, as it turns out, are just features that haven't learned to dance yet.